how way, ay, 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 ay. How we up, ay, 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 ay. How way, ay, 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 how way, ay, 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 ay.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me on Revolution Radio. It is July 9th, 2016, and I'm about to talk to Jeff in the morning. Let's get him in here. Tonight, Revolution Radio is teaming up with the talent of KBHR.
Hello?
Hey, Jeff. Welcome to The Bridge.
Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me. Now we're connected.
We are connected now. This is how live radio is. It's full of surprises.
Yes, you don't have to explain that to me. I've been doing it a long time. That doesn't always go the way you expect it to.
That's right. So you're a long-time radio person. You've been doing radio for a long time. Tell us how you got started.
Over 20 years ago, and basically, I'm going to step outside and see if that helps the signal too. I'm not sure if it will or not, but yeah, I got started. 22 years ago, something like that. I had just come out of the military, and I got radio and video training in the military, and so I kind of used that to get my foot in the door at a local radio station, and started off as a producer for talk shows, kind of like what we're doing, which meant booking guests, answering phones, things like that, and just kind of moved on from there. You know, I've done just about every radio format there is, and I worked for mom and pops, and I worked for a small group of stations that got bought up by a big-time company, which then got bought up by an even bigger-time company, and it just kind of went from there. And so what I've been trying to do in my radio career, because a lot of the big companies, they had layoffs and whatnot, and so I got kind of kicked out for a little while and worked my way back into radio stations, and now I'm back with a big company. So I do that to make a few bucks, but the most exciting thing I think I get to do is KBHR.
Yeah, KBHR is quite a concept. My husband actually turned me on to your show, Jeff in the Morning. And
Wonderful.
I thought, wow, this is cool, because really, Northern Exposure, the show, that was the first time Indians and non-Indians alike saw deep native characters on TV. And
yes,
that's why it holds this special place in our hearts, because it's like Smokey Bernstein was saying this morning, it's a state of mind.
It is, absolutely. And that's how KBHR got started. And I know that was one of the things that appealed to me right away, was that here you were finally seeing true to life, you know, deeply developed native characters in a contemporary setting, because now we have, I mean, people grew up with the westerns and the old spaghetti westerns where the Indians were the bad guy and that kind of stuff, and then they had Dances with Wolves and all that. So people were used to seeing period pieces, you know. And what I think, you know, made Northern Exposure such a breath of fresh air is now you had contemporary Indians in a contemporary setting. You know, it was more true to life. It was more true to what, you know, life is like now when you live near or in Indian communities. And they just kind of allowed them to be themselves, I thought, a lot more. And I'm thinking that is what TV needs more of. You know, what an underrepresented community the native community is. Yeah. You don't see us on a lot of shows. And when you do, it's like, you know, a token, you know, park ranger that, you know, will tell them this, that, or other thing. I mean, everybody loves Indians when they're talking about spirits and, you know, feathers and dances and stuff like that. But nobody wants to hear about the Indians when there's issues that really need to be discussed. So this is really cool.
Yeah, and we have time to get into all of it. But for our listeners who aren't familiar with KBHR, tell us how it all got started and how you guys started your own station.
Yeah, absolutely. The station itself, and it's purely online. It's at kbhr.net. That's the call letters we've given to it, of course, which was derived from Northern Exposure. The station's about a year and a half old now, so it was started basically January of 2015 by a couple of people who had an idea similar to the idea I had for years. I didn't know them yet, but I met them a little while after. And it was basically a group of friends who were all big Northern Exposure fans, like I had been all these years. And so they kind of got this idea, like, well, what would this station sound like if we could put it on the air today? You know, KBHR was the radio station in town in Northern Exposure, so it was almost like a character in and of itself, and Chris Stevens being the DJ. And so KBHR were the call letters of that station in the fictional Sicily, Alaska. And so it was a very unique, full-service, free-form radio station. So it meant you could pretty much say whatever you want to say, play whatever you wanted to play, and it would just fit together and work nicely. And you could hear this amazing mix of legendary music from any genre you can imagine, all kind of thrown together with, you know, a lot of very kitschy kind of programming. It was just really unique. And so these guys were like, well, what would it sound like if we could put this station on the air? So they did it in an online format in January of 2015. Several months later, through a common friend, I met these folks, and I'm so blessed that we had this friend in common that she's like, you have to meet them. Just talking to me, she could tell. It's like, okay, you're a major fan, and you're a radio guy with all this experience. And, you know, what I explained to her at the time, too, was that I had been running my own internet radio station for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it was also KBHR, but it was at kbhrradio.com, and I wasn't using the call letters. I was just calling it K/Bear or whatever, you know. Mm-hmm. And it was a very native-themed station. That's what I was basically doing, was kind of just traditional and contemporary native music blended with some classic rock. And I had been doing that for like over 10 years. And she's like, well, my friends have this station. You need to, you know, you really need to meet them. You really, really need to meet these people. And of course, when I did, we all clicked right away and got this station going that was based, you know, out of our fans, you know, being fans of Northern Exposure. But what I think is happening at this point now, that we're a year and a half into it, is we're getting more and more people who are listening that maybe never even saw an episode of Northern Exposure. They hadn't even seen the show, but they really dig what we're doing because it is totally unique. It's something that you don't hear anywhere else. We still kind of refer to our friends and fans, listeners out there as Sicilians. We're all from Sicily, you know, this fictional sort of community. It's just, it's almost become like a nickname for our listeners and our fans, because what we're doing now, I think, is growing beyond just Northern Exposure. We're growing this brand with people, and we're introducing them, for one thing, to the show, because we are fans and they can check it out, but they're also just really digging the vibe, you know, because what I do on my show, I'm on from Monday through Friday from 9 to noon Eastern time. So it's a 3-hour show every Monday through Friday. And I just kind of provide the morning music, you know, wit, wisdom, cool, you know, hot coffee, cool jams, whatever you want to say, you know. And my show is I think, pretty unique in that fact. I'm on 5 days a week. You know, we have other programs that are on 1 day a week, and they're all amazing, and they're all totally original. And we are given the freedom to basically say what we want to say and play what we want to play. So I like to kind of philosophize. I like to bring in poetry and prose. And these are things that, you know, Chris Stevens did to a certain degree in Northern Exposure, too. So I was obviously influenced by him as a DJ. He was he's actually, the fictional character of Chris Stevens is the reason I even got into radio, because, you know, I watched the show and I became such a fan, and I'm like, I want his job. That's what I want to do. I want his job. I want to be on the air doing that every morning, you know, sharing my thoughts, sharing all this amazing music with people that, you know, and now I'm getting the chance to do that. And because of the unique product that we're building, we're starting to get fans, you know, who never even watched the show, but they really love what we're doing with this radio station. And I would love to see that continue to grow.
Yeah, I really love your show, and I listen to it myself. I've got a few of my office mates into your show as well. And one of the things that's really great is that you do mix in native music. You mix in powwow music and native music, which we don't hear enough of on the radio.
Totally. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And songs you haven't heard for a while, or, you know, nostalgic songs, just songs that put you in a good mood. And the other thing that you're really doing is building community.
Yes.
That's very apparent when you get in the chat room and people are saying good morning to each other, it's like for my husband, for instance, we live out in the woods. We're like 15 miles from the nearest grocery store, and
Wow,
we
yeah.
have one vehicle, and he usually spends the whole day with animals and birds and plants. So it's good for him to have this human contact check-in and community, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You develop friendships and people that you otherwise never would have met suddenly become like important to you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And, you know, you always have something to say about the show itself. Like this, you were talking about a musician that you had played, and you were saying how he very much didn't like being famous. So he was kind of like the Russian guy who used to go to Sicily just to be a normal person. And it's the same in the chat room too. No matter who you are, you're one of us, whoever you are. Mm-hmm. Come on in.
Exactly. Rich, poor, old, young, you know, doesn't matter the color, creed, religion, whatever, we are all accepting. And building communities is something that is so important these days, because we're seeing the breakdown of communities everywhere you look. You know, we're seeing communities that are almost at war with one another, and that shouldn't be the case. And so Sicily becomes almost this, you know, this fictional place, but we've given it like a home on the internet at kbhr.net, where people can go there and always feel like I'm accepted, I'm loved, you know, I matter. You know, whether you come in and you talk all day or you just sit back and listen, you know, and watch, it's you know, it's acceptance. And it's important, I think, to build bonds between, you know, different people. Like I said, you know, it doesn't matter where you come from or your background, you can be accepted there. And we need to build friendships and start to kind of go, you know, reach across fences and things to start understanding one another better. And that's kind of what K-Bear is all about.
Yep. That was the other thing about Northern Exposure too, was we got to learn about each other's cultures. My husband Majikia talks about, I learned so much about Jewish people in that show, and you know, other people are like, I learned so much about Indians in that show, and you know, and it was really deep. And the people in the chat room are teaching each other about each other too, just like
Definitely.
in Sicily. That's, you know, so it's a lot of fun.
It's a modern representation of that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have something really kind of mind-blowing to tell you. You all know my husband by his Indian name, Majikia. Yes. And we were talking offline about naming ceremonies. And, you know, in Native America, it used to be illegal for you to have a native name on your birth certificate. So you had to have a Christian name or a non-Indian name on your birth certificate. And that started this tradition of having a naming ceremony and then getting your Indian name. And so you all know him by his Indian name, Majikia, but his American name is Ed.
Is Ed?
Yes.
We have our own Ed.
You have your own Ed. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And when that show was on, people would always tell him, like, you remind me of someone. Yes, you remind me of Ed on Northern Exposure. He got told that all the time while that show was on. All the time. Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, an Indian named Ed, that's just too perfect, you know. Yep. And to find that out now is just awesome. Yes, for anyone who didn't see the show or hadn't watched the show, Ed Chigliak was was a young guy. He was like 19, 20 years old, you know, when the show started. And but he was just such a charming and endearing character. You know, everybody loved Ed. Everybody was friends with Ed. He didn't have an enemy in the world, you know. And so Majikia is kind of the same way, because he gets along with everybody. He's so like just open and friendly to everybody. Yep. You know, very welcoming. And so it endeared him to us, you know, in the chat room pretty quickly.
Yep. And the thing about Ed too, which is interesting, the character in Northern Exposure, is that he's half Indian, right? But exactly. Culturally, he's entirely Indian, and he really teaches a lot about cultural differences between natives and non-natives.
he bridged that gap really well on the
Yes.
show, you know,
Yes.
which is very interesting. And you can point to a lot of different scenes where he did that.
And so many great lines. I mean, me and my husband have done tons of memes with Ed Chigliak quotes, you know, because he has such gems in that show.
He's extremely quotable. Yeah, no two ways about it, you know, that he was extremely quotable. And being, you know, half Indian by blood, you know, I think in many ways he bridged the gap between the tribes and, you know, the non-Indian people in the community, and which was kind of fun to watch him sort of play that back and forth. But he was completely Indian, like you say, culturally, because he was raised by the tribe, and that's what he knew growing up was all of the traditions, and eventually on the show he began to learn to be a shaman, you know, so that was also something that was cool.
Yeah.
You could tell how important it was to him.
Very important, and how important he was to his people. And he also, if you remember that episode where the totem pole gets built, and there's that rift between the different
two clans.
Yeah. So he also bridged that gap between the clans too. He really struggled with that. Like they really kind of pulled at him, and he didn't didn't respond well to that.
Yeah, it's difficult. He's had to go, you know, Ed and through the series had to go through some of that, and you know, we saw him, you know, some of the people that mattered to him, non-Indians. You know, there was the Maurice Minifield character and Ruth Ann. He worked for both of them, Ruth Ann at the store and Maurice doing kind of odd jobs and things. And when they began to fight and not get along with one another, he had to build bridges between the two of them as well. And so that's something that Ed was wonderful at. And, you know, the more I get to know Miz, I'm sure the more we'll see those kind of character traits come out too, which is really cool.
When you know how Ed Chigliak used to just show up places, he would just be there, you know, like in people's houses and stuff like that. Well, when me and Mijikia met at a powwow in Oakland, California, in like 1997, 1998, around that time frame, and for about 9 months we saw each other everywhere. So I would be on a bus, going someplace, and I would see him on the street. And we'd wave at each other. And then the next day it would be like the opposite. He'd be on the bus and I'd be on the street. And then every single Indian event, we ran each other over and over and over. And so he had that quality too of just like being there, you know, just showing up, like always there.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But yeah, there were a lot of endearing traits too with the different characters and the eclectic patchwork of people that were part of the tapestry of Sicily in that show. And we see that kind of coming up around the radio station now, which is just amazing. And you get people who are conservatives, people who are liberals, you get people who are old, people who are young. I mean, we have, you know, DJs that are the same way. One of our DJs, who goes by the name of Whip Fox on the air, young guy, just turned 30, and yet, you know, we have fans that come in to, you know, listen to the show every morning that are in their 60s or 70s, you know, and so it just appeals across the board, and it's really fun to see that sort of community and learn about different people and different cultures just the same way we did on the show. And I'm really hoping that we continue to grow that as well, because one of the things about KBHR is that, you know, the little radio station in Sicily, Alaska had a little broadcast range, you know, around the community. It would go, you know, I think at one point they built up the tower to go like 200 miles, which is pretty far for a radio station. But with our radio station at KBHR.net, we are worldwide. So we have listeners that tune in from Germany, from Ireland, you know, from all over the globe. And they're fans. You know, we had a guy in there from Tokyo the other day. You know, so I'm really excited to see where this goes, you know, where we can take it from here, how much more this community continue to grow, because I know in the last several months, just, you know, since I've been doing the morning show, we've watched the listenership grow. We have more and more people that are starting to show up, and they show up in the chat room, you know, even just to say hi, you know, just to let us know they're out there. A friend tells a friend, and then office mates are listening, like you said, and they're kind of digging on it, and they're like, next thing you know, they're tuning in on their own, you know?
Yep.
And so that's really, I think there's just so many possibilities for this to grow beyond Northern Exposure fans and really reach out into different communities, and that's one of the things that I thought was important. One of the things I really wanted to do on my show was to bring in that Native influence, because it was there in Northern Exposure. The Indian community was a significant part of that show. Everything from the Raven pageant to the totem pole and all of that. And so I thought it was important because of my cultural background and my experience, and of course the radio station that I ran prior to this. I wanted to infuse as much of that Native community as I could. So that's why you get, powwow music, you get contemporary stuff, you get traditional stuff, and a lot of artists, some of them that have been award-winning artists. Just a few weeks back when we lost Jim Boyd, who was from the Colville Reservation, he was, a musician that was beloved, all around North America, all over Turtle Island. So you have a guy but a lot of people who are outside the Native community had not heard his stuff. So when he passed away, I took that opportunity and did a tribute show for Jim and exposed people to a lot of his music. I took like 45 minutes of my 3-hour show and just played his music and just talked about his, life and career a little bit. And I really, just love that my show gives me that opportunity, to connect with people and to say, hey, here's somebody that meant a lot to me that you might have never heard of. John Trudell was the same way. When he passed away, it was, that was a blow. That one, he was one of my heroes. John Trudell was one of, like, if I could pick out, 3 people in my life that have been the biggest influences, he's one of those 3. So when he passed away, I thought it was also important to do, a tribute show. I read some of his poetry. I played a lot of his music from the early stuff all the way through to his more contemporary stuff. And as a spoken word artist, he's just
gifted.
Powerful.
Yeah, really
just
gifted.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, and his philosophies and his way of looking at things, I want to be able to share that with people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to hear it. So that's a
great
deep,
shows.
important part of the show. Yeah. Thank you.
Really fantastic shows. Ones that I enjoy so much. And I really like listening to it at work because people are like, wow, what is that? Every time they come by my desk, they're like, what are you playing? What's going on? And it builds community at work too, because they stop by to find out what I'm listening to,
Well, absolutely. And if that fosters better relationships in the office, then I've done my job. I've actually, helped build some bridges. And you're absolutely right. And you're not the only one who has told me that too, that we have a lot of people in the chat room and whatnot that have said, yeah, I play it here at the office, and people keep stopping and asking, hey, that's really, what are you listening to? That's so cool, because you're hearing just the most eclectic mix. And, I think maybe it takes people with the right heart, and the right ear to be able to put together programming like that in a way that makes sense. If you're talking about a radio station where you can hear anything from Patsy Cline to the Dropkick Murphys, there's a wide disparity there.
Yep.
But, the way it fits together, the way it flows, you can do those kind of things, and people just love it. They love the way that, it's all about just, putting it together the right way and having the right message. And of course, in our case, the message is always, a positive one. So, whether it's about love or loss or, community. And we talk about some of the current events because it's hard to ignore some of this stuff, but we try to put a positive spin on it and try to, I guess, look at the glass half full more often than, half empty. It's important to, and that's why people love that in the morning where it's like, oh God, it lifts me up and I feel better after I listen to your show.
Right.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
There's this, when you look at the whole array of morning shows that people could choose from, yours is a great choice because, because of that positive message. And that's how we should all be starting our day, because that sets the tone for the rest of our day. So
exactly.
if you come out feeling good, whereas a lot of these other morning shows, they're talking, they're talking shit, basically. That's what the morning show sort of shtick is, I think. And so I really, really, really like the vibe going on your show.
That's awesome.
I'm so glad.
And that's what we, that's what we try to create, and then you really make a good point there about the options that are out there, because, one of the things that's nice, of course, about my show and about KBHR is it's commercial free. So you're not having to stop, and you're not wanting to punch the dial out, every 10 minutes when suddenly there, you get 10 minutes of straight commercials. So, and the thing with commercial radio these days, and I can talk about this, from experience and pretty bluntly, because I know from working on the inside for, a couple of decades that basically, everything you're hearing is a sales pitch, and that's kind of what's tough, is like, it's not even just the commercials. When the DJ comes on to talk, most of your commercial radio now is all corporate radio. There's a few exceptions out there. I mean, when I lived in Taos up near the Pueblo, we did have a couple of radio stations in town. They were commercial radio stations in the sense that, yes, you're going to hear advertising, but they weren't corporate owned. They were privately owned. So there is a slight difference there. But, most of what you hear, especially near cities, is commercial corporate radio. And so the advertisements you're hearing, the commercials are giving you a sales pitch. The DJ is trying to sell, whether it's, an endorsement for some kind of product or it's the radio station brand itself. They're trying to sell themselves to you. And the music that you hear is all tightly, controlled, highly researched. And most DJs that you hear on big radio stations, 99% of them are not even picking those songs.
Right.
It's all laid out in advance, by a well-researched, corporate kind of playlist, I mean, and that's not what you get on KBHR. On KBHR, if you ask for a request, if I can find it, there's a good chance you're going to hear it,
Mm-hmm.
We actually will play your song if you want to hear a song, and it doesn't even matter what genre it is. We'll find a place for it,
Right.
And it fosters more community. People then feel like, hey, I'm connected. I reached out to this person and they responded positively to me,
Mm-hmm.
That's, if it's just a song request, something that simple, it can make a difference in somebody's day. I connected with that DJ and he played my song for me. And he did, and he said positive things, and I'm not selling anything,
Right.
It's everything I do is straight from the heart, it is just, doing the show, honestly, for me has been therapy, because it helps me work out some things as I'm, communicating on the air. And the nice thing about that is that you have people out there that have gone through the same experiences that I have. And it's nice to know that you have someone that has that common bond, or like, I can talk about, a breakup and a broken heart. Everybody out there that's listening has had that at one time or another, some kind of big, disappointment like that in their life. And when I can just share things right from the heart, right from my own experience, and try to reach out and connect with someone on that level, it is so completely different than someone who's on there getting you a sales pitch,
Right.
and not playing your requests and only playing the same song every 2 hours, oh God, there it is again, you're not going to get that from us. And we have this opportunity to basically do whatever we want to do with the station and not having to play commercials and having the freedom to just, put ourselves out there as DJs, the few of us that are doing this, and just actually reach out and connect with people and make a difference in their lives. And that's what I've always wanted to do, because to me, the influence of what I saw from Chris Stevens on Northern Exposure and from John Trudell and from John Lennon and people like that, always trying to reach out and make a connection and actually make a difference in somebody's life,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And in my commercial radio career, it's a job, I'm building widgets just like any other job in many ways. Uh-huh. It's cooler than other jobs, and we do get to do some things that are fun. But at the same time, what I do there is to make a buck, and what I do with KBHR is my art. Mm-hmm. Because it's self-expression, and that's the biggest part of it to me, for personal fulfillment, is what I do every day is I paint pictures with sound.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at it that way, I'm painting a picture with sound, and I use a lot of different colors and a lot of interesting brush strokes, and it's all, coming from this wellspring within me, and I'm putting it out there as my art, and if my art is appreciated by other people, then that gives me a warm feeling, and that makes me feel like, okay, we're all connecting on a good level here. And so to have that, outlet for self-expression, Chris Stevens on Northern Exposure was an artist, as well as a DJ. He expressed his art in many ways through the radio station, but, he also did sculpture, he did performance art, and, shared a lot of those artistic tendencies. I mean, I grew up loving poetry, and Chris Stevens loved poetry, so I like to share those kind of, the poets and the poems that touched me and that made a difference. And people appreciate that in a lot of ways, and I'm always surprised how many listeners I have that basically were like, I love that poem. I haven't read that in years. It was so cool to hear you share that, Hey, thanks for reading the T.S. Eliot today. I really needed that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's amazing to be able to share that. And, when it comes to things like current events, it's hard to watch the news anymore. I mean, wouldn't you agree? It's hard to even watch it.
Yes.
It's painful.
I don't watch it, in fact.
Yeah. You almost have to shut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise you will just be in a depressive state, like, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I share news, if I come across a news story, I always call, like, the good news story of the day. I'll give you a story that will at least maybe put a smile on your face, and that also affords me an outlet to use, to go through, credible news sources in the Native community, because I share a lot of those stories. When you had, traditional land that was returned to a tribe, I'll talk about that. And people are like, oh, wow, that's great. Something good actually happened.
Yeah.
And all I hear about all day is bad stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the network news is, the only place I know can say, good morning, and then spend 25 minutes telling you why it's not a good morning.
Right. Right.
So I want to offer an alternative to that. And for a lot of people, when you're saying, the options for morning shows, either they're getting force-fed sales pitches, or if they're tuning into, like, talk radio, it's negative stuff about the election. It's negative stuff about gun violence,
Mm-hmm.
and people can just shut that out, turn on KBHR, whatever time of day, and they're going to hear great stuff. In the evenings, we have a lot of great programs, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, Wednesday. I mean, basically just about 5 days a week, we have something going on there. And in the mornings, if you're getting up and you're, putting on the coffee and you're kind of getting yourself ready for the day, you can tune in to my show and hear a lot of positivity and hear a great variety of music and something different all the time, and something that hopefully when the show's over, you walk away smiling, going, that was great. That was a great way to start my day,
Yeah, and I always do walk away from it smiling.
Good.
In the mainstream, you're talking about mainstream media, natives are invisible. There really are no stories that you see in the mainstream media about natives. So.
Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that invisibility factor there. So we have the Indian media to fill that gap. But
Definitely.
Just like the mainstream media, the Indian media also, has its own set of gatekeeping, I guess you could say, that goes on just like, anywhere else. So even though we're actually getting stories about natives and some good stuff gets through, there's also other, I guess, narratives that I think in the Indian media, that narratives that have been around for a while and probably need to be rebooted. So I hope that this, spreads to the Indian media as well. So that we're sharing
Absolutely.
more stories about, I want the Indian media to focus more on our heroes in Native country, because there's so many people doing so many good things in Indian country, and you really don't hear that much about it, except through, the Moccasin Telegraph, which is still there to tell each other about what's really going on,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I mean, and I obviously follow a lot of the, native media sources, whether it be more to the mainstream. Indian country media today has been around a good long time.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Gallego, I believe, started that. And so that's one of the better, more credible sources. And you have Native Voice One that's been doing some great radio stuff for years too.
Mm-hmm.
And you have some individual radio stations, that work on different levels. I mean, one of the stations that inspired me when I started my internet station 15 years ago or more, was Keeley. Keeley is on the Pine Ridge Reservation up in South Dakota, and it's still kind of a small operation and still kind of, I want to say it's better about being more in touch directly with the community it serves, which is great. And down here, because I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and not too far from here, of course, I mean, we're surrounded by pueblos, for one. I mean, New Mexico is just full of pueblos and things, but you have the Navajo Nation that's nearby, and I actually, through my corporate job even, cut commercials and things that, that run in Gallup and the Navajo Nation. I do some things for them. But, KTNN, they started, I think, 30 years ago or so. And, it is, when you listen to it, it's much more of a commercial radio station, It doesn't sound like a small community station anymore. It sounds a little more commercialized and things like that. So you can see, like you were saying, kind of that narrative gets much more tightly controlled, And so you don't necessarily always get everything you want to get, when it comes to being directly in touch with your community. I mean, for a lot of reservations, Pine Ridge being one of them, it's becoming, I guess, a little more modernized as time goes by. But, the radio station on the res used to be the way people got in touch with one another,
right.
Yeah. It was like someone you want to reach doesn't have a phone, so you call, Keeley radio station and say, hey, can you tell, George Yellow Thunder that he needs to come by and pick up his transmission, man, because I'm not going to hold on to it. I mean, you would get that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It was the way people got in touch, because some places didn't even have phones, some places didn't have cable TV or internet, and thankfully you're starting to see that happen, in some places. But there's still a lot, where that doesn't happen. And to be honest, I kind of like that sort of, what I don't want to call like amateur kind of vibe, but just more loose and community oriented, where it doesn't feel like it's polished and tightly controlled and all of that. It's kind of nice to have just a loose sort of community radio station. I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, but most of the DJs on KBHR are amateurs. They haven't done radio before, or if they did only a little bit here and there. So they got a taste for it, and they kind of have a good idea about how things should flow. But it really is just people who want to do this for the sheer passion of it, not because they're trying to make money, or not because it's them climbing the radio ladder to get to a bigger and better thing. It really is about coming together from the heart, and that's every DJ that's on KBHR really has a big heart for that. So that's something that I think really does come through in what we do.
Well, I'd certainly love to talk to the other DJs as well, and feature, maybe once a month, feature a KBHR DJ. And
well, that would be awesome.
Continue our friendship that we have going here. A lot
That's
of the
fantastic.
hosts here on Revolution Radio are doing it for the love too, and for the passion of whatever it is that they're into and want to share with people. And there's a lot of diversity as well. And then we have our friends over in Ireland at People's Internet Radio, and this show will get replayed over there on Tuesday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. I had this idea. I wanted to call them during this show so you could talk to some of the guys over in Ireland, but it's not technically possible, because if I call them, then their guest is gonna drop. So we're trying to figure technically how we could do a check-in, since we're partnered with them too, and we want to build that community between radio stations as well. Because I think in alternative radio, you could call it alternative radio, there's a lot of competition, and I just don't really see the need for that, since we're all basically doing what our passion, our bliss. Yeah. Then the people who are going to be attracted to that are going to be attracted to that no matter what, whether you're going to get competitive about it or not. So just do your thing, and support other people, because we're all in this together.
Definitely. You hit the nail on the head. And of course, I'm really excited too that it's going to be played back in Ireland, because that's my other half, basically, the Irish roots. And because anybody that tunes into my show, one of the things about KBHR DJs is that we're not only audio but video if you go to the website. because if you tune in that way, then, directly from KBHR.net, you can actually see a video feed as well. We all have a web camera. So anybody that's watched the show can see I have, the Irish phenotype, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I have fairer skin rather than the dark Cherokee skin, because I'm Cherokee on both sides of my family, and that has always been deeply important to me. And but I'm also Irish, and so I've been, for years listening to Irish radio stations, following Irish newspapers, checking out Irish programs, videos, things like that. I've actually communicated with DJs over there as well. I have a lot of, or I wouldn't say a lot, but I have a few DJs that I've talked to and that, tried to develop relationships with as well. Because for me, a lot of what I express on KBHR is my cultural heritage, because it is such an important part of who I am and how I self-identify. And so that's something that I know that people of a lot of different cultures can relate to, but especially in the Native community, it's who you are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so on my show, as well as a lot of the Native music, you get to hear a lot of Irish music, and again,
Yes.
that, also is traditional and contemporary. And so I mix that in as well, and that's something I'm sure that Irish fans would also appreciate, but anyone with that heritage also really is happy to see that, because you're going to get that on commercial radio. There's nowhere you can go on a big commercial radio station that you're going to hear powwow music, or you're going to hear, traditional Celtic music. I mean, it's just, they're selling a product, and, that, is too much of a niche. It's too small a segment of society. I'm like, you don't understand. People from all cultures can appreciate this, I played African music on my show, too, because I love the multicultural aspect of it all. I like being able to expose people, including myself, to different ideas, different cultures, different ways of living. And one of the things that I honestly learned a lot of this just listening to John Trudell as well. You got to remember that, if you go back far enough, we were all tribal societies.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've really lost, and, through the generations. And I think technology is, doing a couple of different things. It depends on how you look at it. The technology we have today allows us to create a worldwide tribe which is what I sometimes call our listeners in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
These are people listening from all over that are just kind of, part of our tribe. Your tribe attracts your tribe. And so you kind of create a community that way, even though they're from different cultures. We speak different languages sometimes, and we love to share all of those things together as a community. And so technology has both allowed us to expand our circles and allowed us to create niches for our circles,
Right.
Places where you can go where I fit in here. These are my people,
Mm-hmm.
And in our little Sicilian community, everybody's welcome.
Yeah. And
So it's
everybody's
really cool.
really unique too, just like in the show. There,
Mhm.
everybody has their uniqueness that enriches the rest of the community.
Exactly.
So it's a really
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So I hope that maybe some of the hosts over in Ireland would want to have you on on one of their shows over there as well.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, that would be truly be fantastic, because I would welcome that, in a big way. I would love to just kind of make that connection, have some people, in Ireland that I know and that are friends, and just kind of build it, because I have some friends in Ireland already. I have several, because, when years ago, when I knew that, I had Irish and Native heritage, and I had some idea from, the things that were passed down, but, what happened to a lot of my Cherokee ancestors, as you know, they kind of just got wrapped up into the Eurocentric community.
Sure.
And some of the tribal things were sort of, lost and broken up. There was a time, and there'll be people out there that remember it wasn't really too cool to be an Indian,
Yeah, right.
And so I decided to research my family history, and I wanted to know as far back as I could go, everything I could know about it, and realize my ancestors kind of started to leave, the Native communities and get absorbed into just the dominant culture. And sometimes they would, even with dark skin, they'd pretend, they're not Indian, they're something else. I'm Italian, or, I'm Mexican or whatever, because there were places and times where, bad things happened. You know, if they found out you're an Indian, that we all know all too well that, you know, especially in zones, little towns that are near the reservation, you still see a lot of that stuff happening. You know, still see a lot of negative things. I mean, and that is a big story down here in Albuquerque right now. You know, I mean, and you know, we see that we've had, you know, I don't want to get too much into negative things necessarily, but we can talk about a lot of these issues, you know, where you had young kids that were going around just basically, you know, beating up and killing Indians just, you know, because they're an Indian. We're like, they used to call it like bust an Indian. We're going to go and cruise around and we're going to find somebody and pick them up and just beat the crap out of them, you know? And so that's how, you know, in times past, especially when those things weren't policed very well, a lot of my, you know, ancestors began to lose their connections, their tribal connections. So what I did was go back. I'm like, I'm going to do my genealogy. I'm going to find out where we come from. I want to know names. I want to know the towns. And when it came to Ireland, I wanted to trace my Irish ancestors back to the old country. Who was it that came over? What was his name? When did he get here? You know, what and where did he come from? I want to know that. I want to know not just that he's from Ireland. I want to know the county. I want to know the village. You know, give me all that information so I can get in touch with that and I have a better idea of who I am. And that was one of the most fulfilling things I ever did, and really brought me in, you know, brought my culture back to me. And it's defined, you know, who I am ever since, you know, my whole adult life.
Yeah. And so, I think we'd all be better off for having done something like that, especially in America, where, you know, we're taught to get into this sort of melting pot thing where you where you don't honor who you are, and that's what makes people actually sort of appropriate other cultures, right? So there's a lot of that goes on, appropriation of native culture, and it's because because we all originate from a tribal existence, we recognize that within ourselves, either consciously or subconsciously. But for those who are maybe recognizing it subconsciously, they're attracted to natives because they want to bring forth that tribal person within themselves. So instead of researching their own heritage and where they come from and their own traditions and stuff, it's just easier to appropriate native culture instead.
And they don't realize the harm it does too.
Right.
And that's kind of the problem there, is that, you know, you have people, and obviously, you know, non-natives are something that really gets people's ire up a little bit when you start to see that cultural appropriation. They don't realize they're doing it. Sometimes it comes from a place of ignorance, but sometimes it doesn't. You know, you have, you know, people who have ignorantly appropriated native culture, wearing a war bonnet or a headdress, you know, for a photo shoot because it looks cool.
Right.
And they don't know any better. I'm like, you know, would you wear, you know, a Purple Heart if you hadn't earned it?
Exactly.
You know, you don't understand. You're dealing with it. It is bad. And that, you know, comes from a place of ignorance, which isn't necessarily as bad because you can teach them if they're willing to learn.
Right.
But you have other, you know, on the flip side of that, you have people like, you know, Mr. Snyder over in Washington who refuses to change the name of his football team.
Right.
And that's not done out of ignorance. That's done out of, you know, just sheer greed and money.
Yeah. And for people who don't know about what a war bonnet is or the headdress, each and every one of those feathers is earned by an act of bravery.
Absolutely.
So it's no different from, you know, you would probably beat a guy up in the street who's wearing, you know, military regalia and stars and stripes and everything that he didn't earn, but you should be just as mad when you see a headdress because it's exactly the same. There's no difference at all. It's stolen valor. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's so important for people to begin to understand. And if people are willing to learn, if they can open their mind and say, you know what, I don't want to do the wrong thing. Help me understand what the right thing is. That you can work with, you know. But you know, people that have no desire to learn and just don't care. You know, the idiot the other day, I think it was a congressman that was introducing Donald Trump and did a war whoop, you know, because he thought it was funny, you know. And because it had something to do with, you know, Elizabeth Warren, and we can, you know, go into that if we wanted to, but basically, you know, you have people that, I mean, he was just literally making fun of native culture just because he thought it was funny.
Mocking.
And I'm like, what are you doing? You know? I mean, and I saw a cartoon, I think today, drawn by Marty Tubles. I imagine you probably know who Marty Tubles is.
Oh, yes, I love his cartoons.
Yeah, and he was, you know, it was just brilliant. It was a mascot issue, you know, that he was talking about. He took the Atlanta Braves logo and took the feather off, you know, and replaced it with an afro, and said, "Would this be okay?"
Yep.
You know, all I did was just change the feather and put an afro on instead, and people are just appalled. Oh my God, that you can't do that. It's the same thing, people. I don't understand why that is so hard to understand, you know? And they will turn around and say, well, what about Cowboys, the Dallas Cowboys? I'm like, a cowboy is not a cultural heritage. It's an occupation, you know? And yes, people who are serious about, you know, the West and serious about, you know, ranching and they're, I get it. That's what you grew up in. But, you know, it's not cultural appropriation to put a cowboy hat on. It is to put a war bonnet on. You know, and there's a difference there, and it's it might seem like a fine line to some people, but it really is a very different thing. You know, people walk by you on the street, you're wearing a cowboy hat, they just assume you're a cowboy. It's no big deal. You know,
we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a few minutes for the second hour. Welcome back to the second hour of The Bridge with Kira. I'm your host, Kira Young, and tonight I am talking to Jeff in the morning. Welcome back, Jeff.
Hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on today because it's been a lot of fun to be able to kind of share what we're doing over at KBHR.net, you know, a fellow radio station, just trying to kind of get our voice out there. And, of course, to discuss a lot of the issues that we've been bringing forth here in the last hour.
Yeah, so before the break, we were talking about cultural appropriation. You brought up the Washington, D.C. football team, and we live about around 100 miles, I guess, from D.C. in a very, very rural area, but it's still, you know, bleep skins country. And Majiki and I have a son, and he's 11. So, and we've lived in this area since he was about 3 years old. And so just, you know, their paraphernalia is everywhere. And so in stores, when he was little, about 3, he would point to the logo and he would say, "Daddy." So, you know, it
hits home when that happens. It really hits home, you know?
Yeah. And so the first time he was about 6, the first time he ever saw a game, and he saw the crowd and how they had, you know, there's one guy that wears regalia, and they were doing like a tomahawk chop type of thing, and he was absolutely horrified, and he was like, "Mom," you know, he came to me in tears. He's like, how can they do that and nobody defends us? He had learned racial slurs, so he said, how can they racially slur us and nobody defends us? And he was picking up on the fact that they're mocking Native culture with their actions and by the way they're acting at the games. And he was like,
absolutely.
Man, he said, "Mom, sometimes it really sucks being Indian." And it broke my heart in 1,000 pieces to hear him say that. Because we'd always...
God, it breaks my heart to hear you say it.
We'd always raise him around the drum and really to be proud of his Indian culture. And we work with him, you know, to get over that hump of the, you know, the hurt that he felt after seeing that. And, you know, and I think that people act like this because they haven't done the work in order to deal with our shared heritage as Americans and, you know, the genocide that is still taking place in order for this country to exist. That's really, really big, and it's really hard for people to look at and deal with and process and work through. And most people don't want to do that work, and so it ends up in these weird sort of, you know, like the when the 1491 went on Comedy Central, and did that thing with at the game and stuff, it turns into this weird exchange and this uncomfortable exchange between people, because people, and some people will, like my friends even at work who wear the t-shirts and they're fans, and they're like, well, I'm part Cherokee, right? And it's like, okay, it still doesn't make it right. Just because you're doing it to yourself doesn't make it right. Because we're in Indian country, we're getting the same messages that non-Indians are getting. And so, there's that whole thing about, on the one side of it, we play the I'm more Indian than you game. And then on the other side, there's this whole thing about calling each other Redskins, and I, and it might not bother adults, who've worked through it and are just like, yeah, that's part of life. It's one of the things we got to deal with, and Mjikia, he handles things in like a lot of Indians do, with humor. So for instance, we were at a gas station and this guy was wearing an Indians t-shirt, like the Cleveland Indians. And he's a very big, intimidating guy, and he walks by and
he is.
And he goes, Indians, all right, where are they? And the guy didn't know what to say, he was like,
that's awesome. Oh man, that is so awesome. And you touched on a lot of important things in there. I mean, there's a lot of places you can go with that. One of the things, of course, with the cultural appropriation and the mascot issue, which we've been talking about, is how it affects the youth.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that you'll hear about the most within the Native community, is exactly that difference you pointed out, that adults, you've been, especially because of the times, rapidly evolving, I mean, when Mjikia was a kid, things were a little different than they are even today, but for young people coming up, I mean, adults can kind of deal with it. Yeah, I guess that's just life. That's, it's always been that way or whatever. But for young people to have to do that and to hear that story about your son, and it's just heartbreaking, and it's, what is this doing? Well, this is marginalizing a community. This is saying, you're nothing more to me than a sports mascot, Hey, aren't you guys all dead yet? I thought you guys were in the 1800s. No. I mean, there's a whole community out there that is basically being told, you're nothing more than a mascot for my team, or you guys just go off and, go back to the res and handle, you don't need to be out here, or then you get, and this is really what makes it really tough about, being Cherokee too, is that, it's almost the most picked on tribe,
right?
Even within the Native community.
Tribe. I'll have to say it is.
Yeah, without a doubt, really. I mean, it is because the Cherokees did interbreed a lot early on, and we're talking a couple hundred years ago. Mm-hmm. You saw these kind of things. I mean, John Ross wasn't even a full blood, right. And we're going back to like the 1700s, right. So, and he was cheap. And so you get a lot of that, and like every time, and you've experienced this, I'm quite sure, I know Mjikia has too, sure. Where you talk to somebody, they ask about your Native heritage. Oh, my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, and you get that joke that's been right. going around forever and ever within the Native community, right. Let alone on the outside, and sometimes it's well-meaning people that just don't know any better. That just, but it's like, well, okay, fine, you got Cherokee blood in there somewhere. Have you done the research? Who was your father? Who was your grandfather? Where did you guys come from? What traditions did you carry forward? Can you speak your language? I mean, if it doesn't matter that much to you, then you're not Indian, and I mean, and maybe that sounds harsh to say, but I don't know. I mean, to me, I think there's something to be said for actually understanding your roots, actually understanding your culture, and sympathizing with it. Mm-hmm. Because that's what you run into when you run into this cultural appropriation and the mascot issue, is people that are removed from the community that they're harming. And right. and what you get into when it comes to these kind of racial issues, in one of the most difficult hurdles that I think is going to need to be overcome in this community of color, is white privilege. And most people I know, I think, don't even understand what that concept is. Right. And trying to explain to your average, everyday Joe lunchbox white person what white privilege really is is like trying to describe the color green to a blind man. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, how do you, they have no frame of reference, you know? How would you describe green to a blind man, you know? How do you describe white privilege to someone who's only known that? They don't know any different. This is just the way life is, you know? So they don't understand they're mocking, you know, a culture. They don't understand why, you know, black people fear cops.
Right.
You've never lived it. You don't know, you can't see through their eyes, you know? And so it's difficult to bridge that gap. Now, you know, there's people that are willing to open up and willing to listen and willing to understand, you know? And that was one of the things that I had to come to grips with too, because I have the more fair Irish complexion. So I know as I'm going out there, when I leave my house, I'm not necessarily as worried as I would be, you know, if I had dark skin. I don't leave the house and go, geez, am I going to get shot by a cop today? You know, because that's a reality in some places.
Absolutely.
You know? And people, you know, I saw someone share something on Facebook earlier today, and I wanted to comment on it, but my comment would have been like a novel to try and explain to them what they were dealing with, you know, because it was some sort of a caption of, you know, that showed death by cops because of what happened in Dallas this week, you know, and the other deaths that occurred in Minnesota and Baton Rouge.
Yes.
You know, that's all people have been talking about this week is gun violence and this war between police and the community they're supposed to serve. And this thing that this person had shared showed that, you know, well, more white people have been killed by cops than any other race this past year.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you got to put that in context.
Per capita.
Per capita. There are, of course, there were more white people killed than other races.
There's more white people.
There's more of you.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
By a long ways. You know, most of the people in you know North America now are fair-skinned people. You know,
right.
and I mean, what is white anyway? White's not a race. It's a phenotype. You know.
Yeah.
It's basically it's your genes expressing who you are through your DNA. And your DNA, most of your ancestors had fair skin. Odds are you're going to have fair skin. You know, it's not a race. We're all one race. We are Homo sapiens. We are all one group. There is no difference, literally zero difference between all of us. It's just different genes expressing themselves in different ways.
It is
exactly.
It's bullshit.
It is. It's complete bullshit. I mean, there's no two ways about it. So what people have to understand is, you know, were there slightly fewer black people killed than white people, just in sheer numbers? Sure. But per capita, way more. You know, that's a much larger percentage of the black community than it is, you know, the white community.
Right.
And when you break it down further, the Native American community today in North America is the per capita, the most killed by cops.
Right. Native lives matter.
Native lives matter. Absolutely they do. You know, Native people or people who identify as Native or people who are enrolled tribally, you know, are 1%. 1% of the population, which is what made Northern Exposure a wonderful program because, you know, here you have this vastly underserved community that's finally getting representation on national television in a successful TV series. Mm-hmm. But because it's 1%, you have interesting statistics that come up. One of those is that, you know, as per capita in a Native community, they volunteer for military service more than any other race.
Yep.
Per capita, you know, the largest percentage of the Native community, you know, serves their country in the military than any other community. And you also have them as the most targeted by police. Yeah. You know, police brutality, the largest per capita percentage, you know, is Native Americans. So those are things that need to be addressed and people need to understand. And they're not willing to do the work, like you said. They're not willing to do the work required to understand and reach across those boundaries, you know, and say, hey, I get it, brother. You know, I get it, sister. And now I understand. I just didn't even understand before. Yeah. People need to be just willing to do that.
It would make the world a very, very different place. You know,
it truly would, you know.
And I've been saying
I don't know how we... go ahead.
Okay. I've been saying forever that race, the whole concept of race is completely made up. And there's actually no scientific evidence, even genetically, to prove that there are different races because the genetic variances between people within the same race and people from some so-called different races is no different. Mm-hmm. So all we really have is culture. So when we focus on this false concept of race, we lose what we actually have, which is culture. And so that's, again, what I love about KBHR is because we're sharing cultures with each other. We're preserving the best parts of who we are and sharing the best parts of who we are. And recognizing that we really are all one race. We're one worldwide tribe of weirdos just trying to get through the day. So
exactly, figure out all our purpose and everything. I mean, and you're so right. I mean, I not only did I do specials on John Trudell and for Jim Boyd, I also did an Irish and Scottish festival for Robert Burns Day. So my whole show that day was all Irish and Scottish music for Robert Burns. And then when Mardi Gras came around, we did, total Zydeco, man. It was all, New Orleans and Zydeco music and old New Orleans jazz and things like that. So we're celebrating that. Cinco de Mayo, I did all, Hispanic music, all Latino music, and embrace that culture and put it out there. And it was a fun show, my genealogy doesn't say that I have, anything that from south of the border necessarily, but I can love and appreciate that for everything it is and celebrate it and say, man, I'd love to participate in that. Being in New Mexico, I mean, I am surrounded by either native or what people refer to as like Latino culture, That is a significant part of that I'm in, I'm immersed in, and I love that. I love that I can, learn about all of that and be part of it. I mean, I plan on being fluent in Spanish here as soon as possible because I think that it's important to embrace all the differences. I mean, and of course we all know Spanish was from Spain. Right. A lot of people forget that what they refer to as Mexicans or Hispanics or whatever, they're natives, man. These are just Indians. They just lived a little further south. Right. They're all just Indians. But, the Spaniards, the conquistadors invaded, just like, other European cultures invaded up here as well, and went in and took over everything. And so you have a lot of Indians down there that are, again, blended with Spanish blood, but they're Indians. Yes. That's what they are, and it just irks me every time I hear people talk about illegals and illegal immigrants. I'm like, they have more right to be here than you do. Yeah. If you really wanted to if you're going to be that way about it, right. If you're really going to be that way about it, your European ancestors weren't supposed to be here, if that's the way you want to be about it. Now, to me, there's a lot of different ways maybe you can look at it. We're all kind of in this mess now, and there's no way to turn back the clock and make, explorers or whatever you want to call them, there's no way to make them not come on, take the boats across the ocean, and you can't undo that now. But what we can do is try to have some understanding and try to understand that we all are one species. We are Homo sapiens. We are all the same thing. And cultural differences should be celebrated. Not, we shouldn't be dividing one another, and that's what we're seeing more and more and more coming out of, especially in this election season. We're seeing so much of that. Yeah. And for me, like I said, wanting to be fluent in Spanish, I mean, that's an embracing the culture. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, there's more and more of that culture coming through in North America, in the United States specifically. In the United States, we're seeing that is one of the fastest growing communities is what they call the Hispanic community. And the way I see it, you can either get on the bus or you can get run over by the bus. Because it's going to happen. You can sit and fight and bitch and moan. Why do I have to press 1 for English? You can do that all day long if you want to, but you know what? The bus is coming. Yeah, and so you can either get on board and embrace it and go with the flow, or you can sit and bitch and moan and be by yourself,
Yeah, you can either, embrace it and start eating good in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Or complain about it and lock yourself out of some goodness.
Exactly.
That we can share with each other. So
believe me, the food is amazing here.
Oh yeah. Vishiki and I we eat a lot of Mexican food, and we both grew up in California, and so all our neighbors were Mexican, and my cousins are Mexican and Puerto Rican, and so we're all one big family, and we should celebrate that. We absolutely should.
Absolutely. And maybe that comes from me too. I grew up in Southern California as well. So I totally, maybe it's just the familiarity of it. I don't know, or maybe it's just the fact that I was raised right, to understand that we can all accept and embrace all of the beauty of everything around us, and every culture around us. Naturally being Irish, St. Patrick's Day is a big thing for me and my family, but also, don't we, people all across the United States celebrate Oktoberfest and celebrate German culture. There's nothing wrong with that, as far as celebrating that culture. So, one of the things that I think comes up every year in the fall, Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, in the Native communities, people, I think, just don't understand some of the cultural appropriation and how harmful it is, Yeah. We could probably spend a whole hour just talking about, what an asshole Columbus was.
Yeah, really, yeah. When I have another good story about our son, Connor Zaujigwe. Zaujigwe is his Potawatomi name, and it means yellow thunder. And yellow thunder comes from the south, so it could also mean yellow thunder from the south, But when he found out about Columbus, his jaw dropped, and he rolled down the window. We were in the car, and he screamed out the window, "I hate Columbus!" really, really loud. It was like Columbus Day.
Man.
But
well, and there's people. One of the wonderful things, just to frame this a little better, is that you do have some places that are getting rid of Columbus Day, and I'm very proud to say that Albuquerque, New Mexico, is one of those places where it is no longer considered a holiday. It is not celebrated, and in fact they refer to it as they've switched it, much like Washington State, or at least I think it was Seattle and Tacoma. I think it was all of Washington State, might have been. That replaced it with Indigenous Peoples Day. Yeah. And say, the heck with Columbus. We're not going to celebrate him anymore. Everything that we can learn about him historically, he was a dick. He was a terrible human being.
He was a murdering psychopath.
He was a murdering psychopath.
Who
without
murdered
a doubt.
Raped children. Yeah, just not.
And in the worst way.
Yeah.
The executions and things that he was, basically either he did himself or his men did. Brutal. Not even like, a kind, quick death. They were really, really brutal people. And so why would we want to celebrate, someone who basically, was a terrible human being and in many ways initiated the genocide of 500 nations, man.
And he never made it to North America. He was in the Caribbean. He got lost in the Caribbean. And his response to those beautiful Taino Indians that treated him like family was to murder them. It was to genocide them. That was his response to them treating him like family.
That's how he repaid the kindness of people who had never seen him before, had no reason to. And they were nothing but kind and welcoming, and he just slaughtered them. And so that is not something worth celebrating. And the only really pushback you still get is you have the Italian community saying, well, now you're being racist against Italians or something like that. Nope. And I'm like, no, it has nothing to do. He could be from anywhere, and he didn't even sail for Italy. He sailed for Spain. Right. Right. So give me a break. This is something that we need to just kind of, I guess, get people used to that idea. People have never been exposed to the truth about Columbus, the truth about Custer, the truth about, some of these people. Andrew Jackson, why the heck is he still on the $20 bill? Yep. Why are we celebrating? He was basically, and he gleefully, joyfully committed genocide against, his whole thing. The only good Indian was a dead Indian, Right.
That was
that was the way he lived his life.
That was his hashtag. Right? Exactly.
And so it's like, you see the bumper stickers, fuck Custer, there were people that were just terrible people. And here you have, towns named after them. You have, streets named after them. You put them on money and things like that. It's just to honor what, these were terrible, vicious people. And there's so many better people that could be nominated. Of course, me personally, when it came to putting someone new on the paper money, my obvious choice was Wilma Mankiller. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah. What an amazing woman.
Oh,
she was
incredible woman.
Brilliant teacher and wonderful person. I've really enjoyed her
Made it-
books.
Yes, yes. And she did so much for that community, for that little community. I mean, she just gave all of herself and created some great things. You know, I mean, I highly recommend people see the Cherokee Word for Water. If you haven't seen that movie,
Yeah.
very nice, very good stuff. And that'll give you a little bit of an idea of who she was, especially when she was young. You know, but but Harriet Tubman, I'd have been fine with that. You know, get Jackson off the name bill.
Yeah.
You know, and just admit. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, for, you know, when it comes to mending fences and making reparations for things that happened historically. I mean, we all know that the Star-Spangled Banner is stained with the blood of, you know, nations and slavery and things like that. There were some bad things that happened. Part of the thing that's difficult, I think, for white people beyond white privilege is, you know, admitting it. Mm-hmm. Admitting that these things did happen, because, you know, it forces people to face the bad parts of our history. Yeah. You know, and they don't want to say, all right, you know, my ancestors did some really bad things. It doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean you have to continue, you know, this genocide, continue this. I mean, and when we're talking not just, you know, physical, but cultural genocide, you know?
Right.
That was what boarding schools were all about, you know? Mm-hmm. It's kill the Indian, save the man. Isn't that what they used to say back in the day? Yeah. You know? And so that's what boarding schools were all about, and continued until recently. Yeah. People don't even realize how recently Indian boarding schools, I mean, because it's a concept I think that, you know, people with fair skin can't relate to. There was never going to be someone that was going to come in and basically just take your kids.
Steal. Yeah, and the state is still stealing Indian children, and they're doing it under the auspices of child and family, you know, welfare, or yes. You know, they're basically they've criminalized poverty, and the laws that are in place keep natives poor, because when you look at Indian land trust laws, the land, natives can't develop their own land. They can't. So everybody's base of their wealth is being able to use your own land the way that you see fit. But natives can't do that because it's managed by the federal government. You can't even know, because what happened when Indians were rounded up, as you know, and put on reservations, and the land was divided up into plots among families. Okay, so each family got a certain plot. Well, when that person died, that plot went to their heirs. And then when their heirs died, it went to their heirs and to their heirs. And so this land got all fractionated. And so when you're a native and you have native land that's in trust with the government, you can't even know like who else has it with you. And that's starting to change now. But
thank goodness.
Yeah, but there's still so much law in place to keep natives in poverty. And that's another thing that non-natives don't understand. They're like, well, you know, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, get a job. Well, there's 80% unemployment where I live on my reservation. So getting a job is difficult. And there's institutional structures that keep me from being able to start my own business. And everybody thinks that, you know, natives, like, you can just start a business and you're going to get some money, and, you know, and it's really not as easy. And even with college, people think everybody native gets their college paid for. Not necessarily, because all tribes are doing things differently. I mean, fortunately, my husband and son's tribe were doing things well and putting money into trust in order for the education of the tribal members. It's actually in their constitution to see to it that all tribal members get an education. That's
fantastic.
Yeah, so that's a model for all of really Indian country, and also the casino itself is a business model for the rest of Indian country.
I was going to go into that too. Yeah, there's a lot of myths that non-Indians don't understand. Like, aren't you guys all rich because of casinos? No. Let me show you Pine Ridge, you know? I mean, a few of the other places that we can take you to. Pine Ridge has a casino, and it's still poverty, alcoholism. There's intrinsic systemic issues in reservation communities, and you're bringing up some very important ones when it comes to finance and money, you know? The land trusts and things, I mean, you know, we're talking stuff that goes back, like you said, hundreds of years in some cases. And everything gets fractioned, everything gets broken up, and then just swallowed up by the government. And it's the government, the federal government, historically, including the Justice Department and of course the judicial part of our government, have made, basically they play by their own rules, because treaty by our Constitution is law. Right. Treaties are laws. I mean, and that's written right into the U.S. Constitution. You make a treaty, the government makes a treaty. That's a law. And how many treaties did they break? All of them. Mm-hmm. Pretty much all of them. You know, I mean, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, just as an example, which gave not only the blacks, but a significant portion of Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, I think a little bit too. All of that was the Great Sioux Nation by that treaty, 1868. What happened, you know, a few years later? Somebody found gold in the Black Hills. Right. Oh, that treaty doesn't mean anything anymore. We're just, you know, you know. So it's, in other words, they can enforce the laws that keep you poor today, that don't allow you to start your own business. Those laws matter, but the treaties apparently they don't matter. You know, because it's inconvenient for them. Mm-hmm. You know, so that part of it really just boggles the mind, you know, that these things are still going on. And, you know, even within the Native community, you have issues between, you know, the tribal governments and the people they're meant to serve. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we're getting better, but, I mean, that's still, you know, one of the biggest complaints that I hear from people on the res that's, you know, are dealing with that on a daily basis. I have a lot of friends. That's why I brought up Pine Ridge, just because I do have a lot of friends up there that basically will talk about, you know, this frustrating, you know, just relationship that the community has with its own tribal government. I mean, and a big example would have been in the 70s, you know, when you had Dick Wilson in charge up there in the early 70s, who was just basically taking tribal funds, just taking them, giving jobs to his family, to his best friends. All the jobs went to them. Bad nepotism. So nepotism is an issue. Basically theft of funds. You know, you have these kind of things, misappropriated funds, and enforcement sometimes. In the case, I mean, that's what made it so bad about, you know, Wilson's, you know, regime up there.
Well, who they have now,
he was actually hiring death squads, you know.
He was, yeah. Who they have now as president, I'm very impressed with him. And just to point out some positive things that are going on Pine Ridge right now. Their current president, Yellowbird Steele, I think his name is.
Yeah, okay. John Yellowbird Steele.
Yeah, he's an impressive character. I actually work for the federal government. I work in emergency management at the federal level. And so something that recently happened was the administrator changed the law, the Stafford Act, which is the law that federal emergency management goes by, to include. It used to be that tribes, when the way that emergency management works is that when there's an emergency at the local level, local people handle it. But when it's too big for the local government to handle that emergency, then it goes to the state. And when it's too big for the state, then the federal government come in and help out with that emergency. So it used to be that, so what happens when there's an emergency, like let's say an earthquake or a storm or something that damages a lot of houses, and what will happen is the governor of the state will ask the president for federal assistance, and then that's when it's declared for federal assistance. So it used to be that tribes would have to actually go to the state and go to the governor of the state that they were in and ask for help when they were equal to the state. So the current administrator said, no, this is wrong. We want to develop this unique relationship between the federal government and the tribes. We want to improve that. So they changed the law. Now the tribal governments can directly request assistance from the president. And so they're treated more, more as an equal now. And so things are starting to get better. So there was a disaster on Pine Ridge, and usually it's kind of a numbers game. Well, if there's so many houses that are, that are destroyed or whatever, then we come in and the federal government helps. But in the case of Pine Ridge, it's a smaller community. So the numbers weren't there, as far in terms of houses, but for the community itself, it was utterly devastating. And so the president of the Oglala, Sioux, would not take no for an answer. And he kept requesting assistance until he got it. Not only did he get the assistance that the tribe needed, members of the tribe needed, but they did something they even went overboard. I mean, not overboard, but they went out of their way to make sure that assistance made sense. And so instead of usually in a disaster, like let's say, down someplace floods, then for individual assistance the government will pay for your repairs, the things that insurance doesn't cover, that kind of thing. But they looked at the finances and they said, you know what? It doesn't make sense to repair a lot of these homes because they're trailers. They're mobile homes. We're just going to replace them. It's going to be cheaper for us to replace them and give them brand new homes instead of repairing them and then having them still fall apart. So I'm impressed with the leadership there on Pine Ridge right now. And I just want to give that positive note on things, that things are changing, even though it's not to our satisfaction. Things are changing and good things are happening. And there was lots of big ceremonies and between the government and the tribal government, and it was a good thing. It was one positive exchange.
Yes.
So I
think it's important to do that. Yeah, I'm glad you're pointing all that out too, because it's important that we do that, because too often, it's easy to get lost in what's bad, and the negative side of things, and it's important to lift people up when you say, hey, there are some positive things happening. I mean, I actually was friends with, a couple of people that drove those trailers to the Reds, they said,
great.
Hey, we're going down here to pick those up. Tomorrow we're going to be driving up there. And they were sharing pictures on Facebook, of here's the houses that we're moving in, brand new housing for people. And I've become friends, loosely with a lot of the people that either work, there in tribal government. I have a friend that lives on Rosebud, which is nice. It's right there nearby Pine Ridge. The communities intermingle all the time.
Absolutely.
They're all Lakota, so I have a friend that lives on Pine Ridge and works to improve things there. And then another friend who lives on Rosebud, and he works to improve tribal communities there. I mean, they're real activist people and extremely well informed, and know their heritage and their grandfathers, and it's amazing always to see, my friend Iron Shell share his pictures of like his grandparents and whatnot, great grandparents that, going back generations, and they know their stuff. These are families that have been in that community for, many, many generations, going back to, basically when they were herded onto the res to begin with.
Right.
Yeah. So it's exciting to see people, that are doing positive things for these communities. And I'd heard nothing but good things about John Steele as well. So it's exciting to know that, for him to stand up and say, no, we're not going to accept less than what we need for this community.
Yep.
That's good.
His letters were very insistent, and he's saying, no, you're going to help us because we need it. And,
Well, most people aren't aware of the relationships that tribes have with the federal government. I mean, just the average person really doesn't understand how those things work and don't understand the concept of sovereign nations.
Mm-hmm.
That's how do you think these treaties came to be in the first place? Because they were treated as a sovereign nation, The Oglalas, they were a sovereign nation, the Dene,
Yep.
These were these were nations of people making a government to government agreement, and what's happened is that, the federal government of the United States has just continued to follow things when it's convenient for them.
Right.
If something becomes inconvenient, then suddenly the tribe's not a sovereign nation anymore, and we can just do away with this treaty. And so
Yeah.
it's important, I think, to rebuild a lot of that trust. Because it's been lost. Funds have been mismanaged. The Cobell Agreement. To the Lakota, they were supposed to try and, here, we'll pay you. For taking the Black Hills away. No, we don't want money. We want our land that you told us you would give to us, in the 1800s. You said this was ours, and then you just took it. We don't want money for it. We're not selling it,
They've never taken that money. And they've paid the price for not taking that money. And
we're talking about impoverished communities that obviously that money could do a lot of good if you want to play by your Eurocentric rules, do it European style or whatever, sure. I mean, but that's not what this is. This is traditional people with a traditional culture that have sacred ties to this land for specific reasons, historic reasons, and they're not interested in selling the culture or selling, the Black Hills to make a buck, even if that money could help the community because of the way society works right now. It's not about that. There's that, and that's a concept that's hard for people to understand. When some of the, I'm a longtime supporter of the American Indian movement. And I'm talking like a couple of decades. I've been a supporter of AIM. I have a lot of AIM friends, and when they went to jail, it was because I'm trying to live in my traditional way. A lot of the times, that's kind of the way they looked at it. I'm trying to do things for my people. I'm trying to make their lives better. And I'm sorry if that doesn't go by your rules, or I'm sorry if you shake things up once in a while and it makes everyone uncomfortable. You throw me in jail, because I'm breaking, your laws. Well, I have my own laws, my own culture, We had our own way of doing things, and I still want us to be able to do things the way that we've done it traditionally, And so it's about trying to understand, we're living in two different worlds sometimes. But that doesn't mean that we can't reach across and understand one another and come to some sort of agreement where everybody can benefit.
I have this theory that the reason that tribal governments get into the messes that they get into, well, it's complicated, right? But earlier we were talking about how we all come from these tribal existence.
Societies.
So if you look at the history of the world is basically psychopaths taking over. Seriously. And so psychopaths leading and taking over the whole globe. And it's been this sort of move from east to west, right? And so first they took over Europe. They took over, Asia and Europe. And then the people fleeing from the results of having psychopaths in charge came here, but then recreated it. And so our government is set up in a parliamentary fashion, which is all sort of, nice and everything, but then the tribal governments are set up like these mini parliamentary governments after what the U.S. government, the same type of governmental style. And so that's not really an indigenous governmental style.
No.
The whole concept of democracy comes from natives, and that's very well documented throughout history. But yet,
absolutely,
when and I'm putting in quotations, founding fathers, wrote the Constitution, they left out, several very important aspects to the native concept of democracy, which actually included everyone. And so we've been trying to equalize that mess up ever since. Trying to manifest something better. So that document, although it's an amazing document and it should be respected for what it is, because we could change it and add rights, we still have the history of how not all people have been respected. So we have the history of women getting the vote and natives getting citizenship, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way into the Native American Religious Freedom Act, 1978.
Right.
We have
1978.
this concept in that America is like this bastion of religious freedom, yet natives, I was 9 years old before it was legal for me to practice the religion that I practice today, which is Lakota. Although, I'm by blood, I'm Choctaw and Scots Irish and Basque, and my husband is Prairie Band Potawatomi and Northern Cheyenne, but we have close ties with the Lakota, and we're adopted into a family on Rosebud, and and that religion is very important to us, and my very first sweat lodge that I went to, I had a vision of my son, and this was years before he was born, and actually almost a year before I even met his father, Michigan. So and the woman who ran the sweat, Beverly Little Thunder, is also from Rosebud as well. So
far out.
And our brother introduced us. Our brother Peter Broken Leg. He introduced us at that powwow I was talking about at the beginning of the show, the Mills College powwow in Oakland. And then we were friends for about 9 months before we started dating, and then and during that time, Mijiki had become part of Peter's drum, which was called Tate Sapa, and in doing powwows around the Bay Area and in California. And then when we started dating, I went to a practice, and as it turned out, I knew Peter too, and he was like, "Just sit down." He goes to grab a stick, and I just started playing. It was the first time I'd ever played native drum, and he was like, "Are you sure you haven't done this before?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure." And that's the whole thing too in native communities, is the women on the drum thing. That we could do a whole show about that. But that actually comes from the religion being outlawed, because the federal government didn't know the difference between a war song and a song that would welcome a baby into the world. And there was serious consequences for singing. It scared the government so much that they would kill people for singing, because they were scared of the ghost dance too that was taken over.
Yeah, I was going to say that goes back. Yeah, I mean, you can look at Wounded Knee as the biggest example of that.
Right.
And
exactly.
It's amazing how much you and I have in common too, because I've also been following the Lakota religion for the better part of 20 years, and it's because maybe of who I knew, and where I lived, being Cherokee by blood, and we've also traced back and found Shawnee in my family history too, and I believe there's Choctaw, but primarily Cherokee. But I lived for over 10 years in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which was not, too far south, just a couple hours south of Pine Ridge, and I got to know a lot of Lakota. That's where most of my friends were. So that's kind of the culture that I began to learn about first as I'm researching my family history and all that. I didn't have any Cherokee friends, but I had a lot of Lakota friends. So, I learned more of that language and that religion, and I was accepted into that, which was, it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life and my entire viewpoint on everything. And so it's interesting that we both kind of have that in common. And when I heard, Mijiki had been invited to Crow Dog's Paradise, to do Sundancers, or even a sweat, I'm like, oh my gosh, because that's deep blood right there. That is some deep blood. We're talking, the Crow Dog family. They go back so many generations. You had a lot of full bloods, they didn't, there was some intermarrying. You had, Mary Moore was from Rosebud, but so were they, so.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating, and all the people that I've gotten to know up there, to be Facebook friends with some people that have been in movies and everything, and it's pretty interesting, because that's become a thing, up there, the way it has been for a while down in New Mexico. Is you have native people that are taking up cameras and lights and scripts and putting their own story out there. Chris Iyer is a fantastic director, Smoke Signals, and we're talking about movies that were not just made for Indians, but made by Indians, you know, telling our own stories. I mean, and that is just what's so exciting to me, to see that getting out there a little bit, you know, and a lot of these films people won't have heard of because they're not getting the mass distribution that, you know, I mean, you see how Hollywood whitewashes everything. I mean, really, Tom Cruise was the last samurai? That guy? You know, I mean, come on, you know, so it's nice to see real Indians not only, you know, acting, but also writing, directing, filming this stuff, you know, and there's a lot of great things out there. Songs My Brothers Taught Me, you know, and some smaller films that are just starting to kind of get noticed by people. And Smoke Signals, we were, you know, lucky it caught on, and people, non-Indians, started really like, oh, wow, you know, I really dig that. But there's a lot of great stuff that's been out there for a while now, and I think that that's what's important, and I would love to see that on TV, you know, even just the way we did it with Northern Exposure, you know, 30 years ago almost, not quite 30, but, you know, seeing contemporary natives in a more contemporary setting, just, this is who we are today. And it's really great. I mean, my God, Indian humor is the best kind of humor there is.
That's right. Yeah. And
you know?
it's self-deprecating quite frequently, Indian humor is. And there's that humor about laughing at the ridiculousness of the situation.
Charlie Hill was great at that, you know.
Yeah, but right, and that my mother really, really loves Majikia's humor, and she loves, and definitely our son has inherited it for sure.
Well, I got a friend up in Taos that I used to work with, although I rarely saw him because he hosted a show on Monday nights. Pat Romero does a show called Moccasin Wire, and it's on K-Taos radio up in Taos. And his humor, he was the same kind of way. He'd just make me laugh, like, all the time. He would just laugh out loud, you know, and it's just that wonderful, occasionally self-deprecating, Indian humor. You know, hey, don't play your request tonight. You know, don't throw rocks at my dog, okay? You know,
right?
I mean, just it's this community, you know, just humor that's just so beautiful. You know, a celebration of a culture. You know, we're very funny people when we want to be.
Yeah, that's all we would do at drum practice with Peter on Tate Sapa. That's all we would do, would be sing and laugh the whole time, and that's the spirit that really goes on at powwows as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been making the news down here because, you know, the quote unquote world's largest powwow, the Gathering of Nations, has been here in Albuquerque for almost 40 years, I guess, at this point, or maybe even over 40 years, and basically just got unceremoniously kicked out of our home.
Right. And
my parents are actually really good friends with the Matthews family that started Gathering of Nations and still owns and runs it today. So I've got a little bit of an inside scoop on a lot of those things. But fortunately, it's found a new home for next year.
Oh,
but my dad is actually heading up a project right now to create a brand new cultural center that will house the Gathering of Nations as well as a big Hispanic event down here, Mariachi Espectacular. I have a hard time saying it, but I'm getting there. But anyhow, Mariachi Spectacular will be in that building as well as the Western Music Association, which is more like cowboy type stuff. And so it'll be a multicultural center, but it will be more than big enough for the Gathering of Nations. So it's only a couple of years away. Hopefully, it's still in the development stage, but it'll be a new home that I think, you know, will be something to really be excited about, because it won't be just, you know, them borrowing the basketball court from University of New Mexico. It'll be a permanent home where it will be just dedicated to Gathering of Nations, you know.
Awesome.
And so that will, you know, provide opportunities for something that's year round, not just, you know, 3 or 4 days a year.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that.
That's great. I knew they would find a home for sure.
Oh yeah. An event that size, and they were invited to so many different places. I mean, there were cities that were making offers that, really? You know, elsewhere, like, you know, I don't remember which ones it was, but like, you know, Las Vegas, Phoenix, you know, Tampa. I mean, there were just other cities that were saying, we would love to host your event. Hey, if they get you out of Albuquerque, then come here, because, it's a huge event, millions of dollars involved. But to me, it's not obviously about the money. That to me is one of the largest celebrations of Native culture that we see every year. And so things like that, you just don't want to see them go away. I mean, I know some people complain that powwows have become more commercialized and less traditional, but you can still go to small, more traditional powwows. I go to every one I can get to.
Yeah.
Right now, as we speak, the Taos Pueblo powwow is going on. And if I'd had a little bit more money out of this paycheck, I was going to go,
Yeah.
And that is a small community powwow. They do things a little more traditionally. It's not highly commercialized. I mean, of course, there's vendors there. I mean, people want to,
Sure.
sell and trade and all of that kind of stuff, and it's a beautiful thing. They have awesome drum groups that come up. I went to the 2013 Taos Pueblo powwow. Is one of my most cherished memories in my entire life. I mean,
Those little ones are spectacular powwows.
They are.
It's like getting together
really
with your
is
family.
which is what it is.
Yeah. We did one for the Miwok people, which are California Indians. For their Acorn Days, they decided they would have like a little powwow. And we showed, this is when we were with Tate Sapa and Peter Broken Legs Drum. And we got there, and as it turned out, we were the only drum. And so we sang every single song, and we were rocking. We just, the vibe was there, and it was so awesome. And at the end of the powwow, the dancers all came up and put their money on our drum. And the elders shook our hands, and it was like, this was amazing. And that was the last powwow that we did together as Tate Sapa. So.
Oh, wow.
I told you it'd fly by.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I was going to say, we're pretty much out of time now.
Yep. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me, and I know we're going to do this again sometime.
I hope so. I look forward to it.
Right on. Thank you, everybody,
Thanks so much for having me on.
You bet.